Hudson Valley. Locust Grove is a historic site once owned by Samuel Morse, located adjacent to Route 9 in Poughkeepsie, New York. And it just so happens to be one of the most well-preserved examples of the trend of American landscape gardening seen today. The massive property contains a 25-room Italianate mansion built in 1851, along with much of the original landscape design intact. Of course, this has been changed slightly over the years. Many features include rolling hills, a high bluff overlooking the Hudson River, a rich variety of beautifully manicured gardens, and almost 5 miles of carriage roads. One last thing to mention would be the property's namesake, the black locusts. No, not those locusts, but these. Yes, I thought it was the bug too. Putting all of these things together, one can see the intent put into designing such a landscape. It feels natural, although in a picturesque way, you can see how the land was changed for that exact purpose. The very same spirit of a Hudson River School painter lives in these grounds. Yet, when one finds themselves immersed in the rich history of landscape architecture, they typically don't think about the lives of important inventors for reference. Sorry, Sammy. Instead, they might find this quote: "The three perfect fine arts are poetry, music, and landscape gardening." Ironically, this quote comes from none other than Samuel F.B. Morse himself, the former owner of Locust Grove, and the man most historically known for his contribution to the invention of the telegraph and Morse code. In 1826, he delivered a series of lectures in front of the National Academy of Design, a school which he helped found. All of these lectures started with the same description, invoking these fine arts, a subject to which much of Morse's life was devoted. What most people do not know about him is that Morse was first and foremost an artist, classically trained in many subjects, but most importantly, landscape gardening. Yet, Morse only lectured on the subject in his 20s, and it wasn't until 25 years later he was finally able to indulge in his artistic fantasy.
Morse was really kind of interested in design. He talked about landscape design and improving your country house 20 years before he even bought Locust Grove. And so the theory's always been that he put a lot of the ideas that he talked about in his lectures in play at Locust Grove.
Morse's passion is brought to life by Locust Grove. But it was his invention which both enabled and ensured his artistic vision was kept alive. Born in 1791, Samuel Finley Breeze Morse was the son of a pastor in the small town of Charleston, Massachusetts. He was a privileged boy, yet not too unfamiliar to hard work. At the age of 14 in 1805, after studying at a private school, Morse began attending classes at Yale College, studying religious philosophy, mathematics, and the science of horses. Much unlike the cliché of the starving artist, Morse actually funded this endeavor himself, and he did this by selling his own paintings. It was not an immediate realization for Morse that he wanted to be an artist. He drew for many years during his childhood, but it was evident that his skills were natural. Becoming an artist took the focus of his ambition for the early period of his life, and in 1810 he graduated from Yale. Curiously enough, science and electricity only ever proved to be a secondary interest at this point in his life. Later that year, Morse moved his main focus overseas to attend the Royal Academy of Arts in London, where he studied Renaissance art.
It's Large Benjamin.
Say it again?
No, one take, baby.
It was also in England when he was exposed to many new ideas, including many ideas about landscape architecture, being that it was a very popular art form in Europe at the time. These ideas had yet to make it to America. The work and theories of gardeners such as Lancelot Capability Brown was still contemporary and popular in the time Morse made it to London. Ideas from this early exposure gave Morse an edge in this field, preemptively preparing him for his later life. Elements of the Locust Grove property specifically show his razor-sharp understanding and appreciation. Morse would stay in England all the way through the War of 1812, but eventually moved back to America in 1815, where he worked professionally as a painter. As previously said, he would eventually found the National Academy of Design in 1826, giving those preeminent lectures the same year. Just for reference, when Morse gave his lectures on landscape gardening, Andrew Jackson Downing, the grandfather to the American theory of landscape architecture, was only 10 years old. It would be another 15 years before Downing would literally write the book on the subject, objectively late to the party. For Morse, Locust Grove was the property that his family used as a summer home up until his death. Today, after nearly 175 years, a large amount of the property still exists under the same name, being far more substantial than when Morse first laid his claim on the property. Among its many neighbors, the vast Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery sits to the right, and the Poughkeepsie Marriott to the left. And not too far down the road, the former residence of Matthew Vassar, Springside, sits waiting in the shadows. Not to mention the Hudson hugs Morse's former estate, reining in the vast grove. But what exactly is a grove? A grove is defined as a small group of trees that afford shade and allow for walks. It is in my opinion that most people don't share this as common knowledge.
You get the hamburger?
Do you know what a grove is?
Yeah,
What is it?
it's a place.
Do you know what a grove is?
A grove?
Yeah.
Like a grove of trees?
Yeah, so you know what it is?
It's kind of like a cluster, right?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Well, I guess I was wrong. I decided to ask the same people if they knew what Locust Grove was. And, well... Do you know what Locust Grove is?
It's a place with locust trees.
What kind of locust trees, though?
The cool ones. It's a cool place. I've never been, but I know that it's cool.
Do you know what Locust Grove is?
Yeah, I do. It's over. I've never been to it, but it's right before, right on the way south of Route 9.
Do you know what the locusts are?
The bugs.
I knew what a locust, or what a grove was, but I did not know what a locust was. I was happy to find out it was named after the tree and not the bug, which was my first initial fear when I came up here. Morse, as far as we can tell, was looking, when he bought Locust Grove, for what would become a new permanent year-round home for himself. He had this sort of vision of himself as sort of a 18th century English aristocrat on his big country estate, which didn't really end up happening in Locust Grove. Morse's idea of being able to be a full-time farmer and kind of give up his really complicated work with his telegraph patents never really panned out.
Let's rewind the clocks to 1847. It has been 25 years since Morse gave his lectures at the Academy of Design, and he is now in his late 50s. Being only a few years previous after having a breakthrough with the telegraph, he is now rich with excess wealth from the patent. Art is a luxury he can afford now. The man naturally purchases a parcel of land formerly owned by John and Isabella Montgomery, located in Poughkeepsie. His neighbors are not ordinary tillers of the soil, but rather they are Van Rensselaers and Livingstons, aristocratic families of Hudson heritage. The property he intends to call home was once owned by Henry Livingston Jr., the uncredited author of the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas. It was this man who actually named the property in 1771. Morse originally purchased the property with the intention of using it as a farm, but that thought evolved over time into something else. By this time in Morse's life, he had abandoned most artistic endeavors altogether, a stark contrast to the young artist who paid for his tuition through his art. Thus, it's only fitting that Locust Grove would feature prominently later in his life, becoming the major outlet for his artistic anxieties. As he first began to live on the property in 1847, Morse took on the challenge of landscape garden development, using his preeminent knowledge combined with modern interpretations to produce a wholly original take on the picturesque. After a number of expansions, Morse contacted architect Andrew Jackson Davis in 1851 to design a house for the property. But from the limited correspondence that survives between the two, it's clear to see that Davis had some influence on Morse's landscape decisions.
Again, there's not a lot of documentation for how Morse and Davis knew each other, but socially they would have overlapped in so many different ways. And Morse's final bill for plans, specifications, and construction supervision at Locust Grove was $192.50, which even then would have been a really small bill for the amount of work that Davis did here.
Though Morse was an artist, he did not flaunt the skill of a master such as Davis. Construction of the house was completed in late 1851, and after 1852, no major changes were made to the property for the rest of Morse's life. The house continued to operate as a summer home for the Morse family until Samuel Morse died in 1872, after which the family began to spend less and less time at Locust Grove. The property was rented out to various tenants, and eventually it was sold to one of them, the Young family, in 1900. It was the Youngs who eventually realized the cultural and historical significance of Morse's influence on American society. Even before they purchased the property, the family had already gained a reputation for respect and appreciation for Morse's legacy, and because of such, preserved the landscape. However, changes were still made, such as the expansion of the property and addition of things like trees and shrubs to ensure privacy. To put it into perspective, the land which Morse lived on was a 76-acre parcel. Today, Locust Grove comprises over 200 acres of land. It was Martha Young who cultivated additional gardens on the property. The style of garden planted by the Youngs is a unique style which has come to represent the preferences and influence of the Youngs on the property. As the last of the Young family died, it was Annette Young, a woman who loved the estate, who ensured the survival of the landscape. In her will, she stipulated that the Samuel F.B. Morse Museum open on the property and operate in perpetuity, meant to be enjoyed by the public, run and preserved by a board of trustees. In 1975, after Annette's death, that is exactly what happened. Today, you can visit Locust Grove just as Annette Young intended. Perhaps you wanted to take a tour of the house, hike the miles of winding carriage trails, make your way through the many exhibits at the site's museum, taking your time at the gift shop, or even enjoy the property with a special event. Got a wedding coming up? In a very fitting way, all of these options highlight the property's unique position in American history. Yet, it will take quite the discerning visitor to truly appreciate aspects of its importance. Locust Grove is probably one of the most well-preserved examples of landscape architecture in the Hudson Valley, maybe even the country. Though the legacy of the site still lies with it's Morse's crowning achievement, and what he's most admired for. For that reason, it is what the museum will continue to show people for the foreseeable future. It's not like this is a bad thing either. In a way, it's what makes the property even more impressive. Certain elements of history are often deemed important over others, like Morse's career as an inventor versus his time as an artist. Without his invention, Morse wouldn't be a household name, and neither would his art have the same value as it does. In much the same way, the landscape at Locust Grove wouldn't be as well preserved as it is today without Morse. It's a strange dichotomy, yet we should be thankful for it. Thankful that along Route 9 sits a remarkable piece of art that will survive for generations to come. This is Kevin Packrad, signing off.